fear exists nowhere except in your head. There's no fear out here. It's all here. And when we get outside of our head, and I always say, go from your head to your heart. And when we start to understand this, that if we make a decision, an irrevocable decision to move forward, to do something.
Welcome to Clicks and Bricks Podcast. We talk about the entrepreneur mindset.
If you get one shot at this, what kind of shot are you going to take?
If we forget who we are, they're going to forget who you are.
And you've got an adversity story that's out of this world.
Everything from that Main Street brick and mortar to that billion-dollar manufacturer.
Shawn, thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited to have you on this show. Before we jump in and start talking about your business, do you mind telling the audience a little bit about who you are and where you're from?
Well, first, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's good to be here. You know what? Who I am, that's a loaded question. I don't know if we have enough time to go into that. It's interesting, and I'll quickly share this. This week, I was looking for something for my son in the basement of the house, and I came across a book that I asked, and this will date me. I asked my parents to order when I was 13 years old. The internet, as we know it today, obviously did not exist. And it basically is a watered down version of management consulting. And so that's where it started. I grew up rural as a farm kid. There's no one to consult to at 13 and you're in school, but I thought I was going to make millions at it. At least, that was sort of the gist I got from reading the back of the magazine when I ordered it or had my parents write a check. So I have been involved in this, and my son said, so that's the book that started everything. And I thought, that's actually a good way to put it. So I have been doing what I do, and I actually am not a fan of the words coach or coaching because I think there's a stigma attached to them, and I don't know necessarily that it's a positive one for a whole bunch of reasons that I don't think we need to get into. But what I really do focus on with the individuals, the leadership teams, and the leaders that I work with, entrepreneurs is a big part of that, is the results. At the end of the day, the reason I become involved with somebody or with a group or an organization or a company is a shift and a change. For most people, a shift and a change comes very hard. As a matter of fact, most people remain the same until the pain of remaining the same is greater than the pain of change. So, at the end of the day, we really need to embrace whatever it is we need to in order to get where we want to. And so when I work with individuals, when I work with teams, when I work with entrepreneurs, we really want to know where they're going. And if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? So my background is that I'm married. I have two great kids. I am a recovering workaholic. I've written a couple of books. I've done a couple of these things here where there's an actual plan behind what you do on a day-to-day basis instead of just waking up in the morning and looking at your desk or looking at your van or truck or whatever it is and going, what's the biggest fire I have to put out today? Because if that's how you operate and that's how you live, it's a sure way to fail. So that's a big part of me. I travel extensively. I speak all over. As a matter of fact, I'll blow my own horn a little bit. Just this week, I was named one of the top 25 speakers for 2022. So I do a lot of that. I spend a lot of time sharing with people. And that involves business. That involves obviously who we are, because everything starts in the 6 inches between our ears. For me, it may be a little bit more. At least that's what my optometrist tells me. And that, that's who I am. I really, my dad taught me a lot of things. One of the things he taught me long before he left this planet was the only thing you take with you is your name. So I really put an emphasis and a focus on how can I add value? How can I contribute? And when I walk away from it, I can be proud of who I am as an individual based on my positive contribution.
I love it. That is a great way to live and a great way to be. I understand what you're saying about the coaching and the stigma. I don't know what it is. Every entrepreneur I talk to, every business person I talk to tells me that they have a need for a coach, mentor, something along those lines. And I think there's just the barrier to entry to be a coach is so low. And there's a lot of people out there that say that they're coaches that don't run successful businesses, right? They're going to be coaches to entrepreneurs.
It's a challenge from the inside out. It really is. And there's a gentleman who shall remain nameless, and I had this conversation. I'll share this very openly. He was at least pre-pandemic. He was, he'd rent out a ballroom and invite a bunch of people, charge them a nominal fee of $200-300 for the weekend. And so they'd spend 16 or 17 hours with them, and he'd hand them a certificate after it said they were a certified coach. And in their minds, they thought this meant they were going to make millions of dollars because that's what was alluded to over the course of the weekend. My humble opinion, you're not a coach just because you spent 16 hours sitting in a hotel ballroom. There is so much more. And I always say this, whenever I'm working with, in particular, an individual, everything, and there's no exception to this rule. Everything comes out on the table. Business, career, relationships, including personal. And some of the things, if phone lines and the internet lines and my boardroom could talk, I mean, the things they could share, because I had a lady come in she was from the Eastern Seaboard. She was with the military for full 25 years and decided to become a realtor when she retired. And she could never, ever, ever find herself in the top, position, being number one in her board, her real estate board. And she worked at this for 7 years. She knew what she was doing. And a lot of the one-on-one clients, and I only take on 5 one-on-one clients at any given time, but she flew to my office and we spent her first VIP day. And her husband came with her and she said, "Do you mind if you sit?" And I said, "No." And we went for lunch at 12 o'clock. And over lunch, she shared a conversation, something that had happened when she was in the 7th grade. And when we got back to my office after lunch, I asked her husband if I could have a couple hours with her in the boardroom and he could go down to Starbucks and have a coffee. And of course, he agreed. And somebody had told her something in grade 7 or 7th grade, was her math teacher, that she was worthless. You wouldn't get away with this today, very likely, but she was worthless. She'd never amount to anything. She was a piece of something or other. And she had held on to this boat anchor for her entire life, decades. And at the end of the day, from this aspect of it, it was holding her back. And she left that boat anchor in that room that day. And within 3 months, she was the top in her board. And that had nothing to do with transactional business. It didn't have to do with profit and loss. It didn't, none of that. So when we start to understand that everything starts here, the chair you're sitting in right now, the computer you're watching, the phone you have, the car you drive, everything was an idea. And some person said that moved into form as a result of predetermined action steps. I'm going to accomplish this. Here's the steps in which I do it. So we work with people, we work with organizations. Where are you going? What's that destination? And then we reverse engineer it. Because if we say, if the most money you've ever made, we'll use money as an example, was $50,000 a year. And you make a determination that you want to do $1 million. If you've never been there, there's a good chance you're never going to get there. Okay. Unless you do it the right way. And so again, I'm a simple guy. You can eat an entire apple. You just probably can't eat it in one bite. So if we take that apple, we break it into bite-sized pieces. Now we can assimilate and understand. So if we take this great, big, hairy, audacious goal, as Jim Collins in the book Good to Great talks about, and we break it up into bite-sized pieces. So you know what you have to do every year, every month, every week, every day. And for guys like me with perhaps undiagnosed ADHD, every hour, at the end of the day, all of a sudden we're making progress. And we have these accountability check-ins where you go, okay, where am I today in relation to where I was, 90 days ago? And we see this start to take shape. And all of a sudden, this becomes habitual rather than whatever was before, because we've consciously replaced a paradigm.
Absolutely. I see it a lot on failure to launch people. Like that they're like, they want to do this thing, but they're always talking about when they're going to do it. And I think that the fear of failing is worse than the fear of not getting started, right? And they're just afraid of something that's going to happen in the future that's not their outcome or something. Right. I try not to get into other people's heads too much when it comes to that kind of stuff, but it's definitely, there's a lot of consistency woven through that narrative.
There's a few things. There's a 3-letter word that starts with H and ends W. And that 3-letter word is probably the most detrimental word you can ever utilize in your vocabulary. I don't know how. And that's where most people stop. The other one is a 4-letter word that starts with F and not the one that comes to mind first, likely for most people. And that's fear. And fear exists nowhere except in your head. There's no fear out here. It's all here. And when we get outside of our head, and I always say, go from your head to your heart. And when we start to understand this, that if we make a decision, an irrevocable decision to move forward, to do something, whatever that something may be, and we take the first step, and that's all it takes is the first step. But most people, and I remember Bob Proctor years and years ago, he just passed away, as 3 months or so ago. We talked about this. He said, get out of your easy chair, Shawn. I said, what are you talking about? He said, get out of your easy chair. He said, and when you see that terror barrier, he said, it's going to be as high as you can fathom, big, thick. You don't think you can get over, through, or around it. He said, but it's made out of paper mache. You can just go right through it. And on the other side is freedom. And so that takes us to that next step. When we start to make these steps and we make progress, freedom is defined in 3 ways: the ability to do what you want, when you want, and with whom. And those are that encompasses everything. That's all there is. If you want to travel, you want to spend time with family, whatever your priorities are, all of a sudden it gives you the ability to do that. When you wake up in the morning and the first thing you focus on is putting out fires, that means your entire day, or a good majority of it, is focused on putting out fires. I don't care if it's your personal life. I don't care if it's in your relationships, your marriage, whatever it is. If you're focused on fires, that becomes the norm. That means you're living and or doing business by default. The surest way to fail, and I promise you this, is to do it by default.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit, because I've fallen into this trap. I fell into this trap and lived in this trap and actually praised this trap for a very, very long time, right? So just walk with me for a second. I run data centers, and there's always something broke, right? I mean, 50,000 square feet of space, so many air conditioners and generators and all this stuff, right? And I took over at a very pivotal part in the company's business and in its tenure, whatever, right? It just went from a profitable company to a wildly unprofitable company. And the president died, and I took over as president and said, hey, fix this. It's broken really bad. And I took a huge amount of pride in fixing the broken stuff, right? And I worked hard every single day, but I couldn't lose because nobody expected it to succeed, right? Everybody around me is like, oh, this is going to, yeah, you're going to give it a good try, Ken. Sure, go for it. But, we all know what's going to happen. We're going to all lose less money when you're done because you're going to make some efforts, but we're not going to get out of this. And we ended up getting out of it. Then I had to really change the way I do everything, right? Because, oh shit, now it's not a broken company anymore. Now I have to thrive. When somebody moves from, and it's hard, right? Making a change is really hard. When somebody's moving from that scarcity mindset or living mindset into a thriving mindset, what are some tips or tricks that they can use to help them shift that gear? Because it's a pretty big gear to shift.
You're right. And it is a big gear to shift because part of it is conditioning. The decisions you make, how you live today, is based upon conditioning. And that conditioning, or that paradigm, which is a group of habits, all of which typically aren't your own. They are unsolicited gifts from parents, educators, and religious influences as we grew up. So the reality of it is the decisions.
You're using the term gift there loosely.
Well, yes and no, because listen, they did their best. I don't begrudge anyone for doing, from a personal standpoint, and I share this very openly. My dad was killed a number of years ago in a hit and run accident. I remember about a year before he passed, and he was a proud man. He was an entrepreneur his whole life. I'm sure that's where I got it from. And I remember it was Thanksgiving, and he put his arm around me, and he lived about probably 700 miles from where I live. And I remember put his arm around me, and the biggest thing he'd ever done is he apologized to me for some of the mistakes he made as I was growing up. And, they were obvious, and we had lots of conversations about it, but until that point in time in his life, he didn't see it as mistakes. And they were, in my mind, they were glaring mistakes. He didn't see it that way. So he did his best. And I think most people do. We talk about religion. We talk about, educators. They've done their best. But the challenge is they only could give you or impart to you what was inside that frame or that wheelhouse, theirs, right? And anything that sometimes we talk about, we talk about expanding what goes on here, or that all of us it was intended that all of us live a life of abundance. They look at you like, and I remember having this conversation with my mother when my first book came out. And in the beginning of the book, for first couple of chapters, I talk about how I was raised with a scarcity mentality. And she took it very personally. I can't believe that you'd bring our family name down by saying that. It wasn't about that. right? In any way, shape, or form. It was how I was raised. I remember being, it's probably 20 years old. And my grandmother, who's long since passed, said to me, your grandfather was a police officer, and that's our role. You need to go down to the police department and go to the recruiting unit and apply. And being the good kid that I was at the time, she said, get in the car, Shawn, and I did. And she drove me to police headquarters, and she said, go upstairs and apply. And I did. And for a whole bunch of reasons we won't get into, I was declined. And thank God, because I would have been one really upset PO dude walking around with a gun on my hip for 25 years till I got my pension. So, everything happens for a reason. I'll share this. The other thing that happens to a lot of it depends how we think sometimes and who we are, and everybody's different. And it'd be a really boring world if we're all the same. But some people think a little more from the left side. Some people think a little more from the right side. And right side, of course, is much more creative. Left side can be a little more analytical. And sometimes, no matter which side we come from, we have this thing where we get caught in here and we want to be perfect at something. And I put that word in quotation marks, perfect, because perfection doesn't exist. It's another one of those tools in the toolbox of procrastination. Because how many people do you think there are out there that want to perfect something before they move to what it was intended that they always do? Right? And the answer is there are millions and millions that don't go anywhere. They stay stagnant. So I think at the end of the day, if we're going to get caught in a trap, one of the traps that I think is the best one to get caught in is, how do I continuously learn, grow, absorb? How do I become that sponge? How do I, whether it's through, podcasts or books or audiobooks or, Zig Ziglar used to call it automobile university. In his day, it was cassette tapes. When you start to understand that we can constantly become better, you realize the average person gets out of whatever school, high school, college, university, whatever it is, to close the book and never open another one unless they're told to, I don't know. I remember when my first son was born, somebody went and got me this book that was probably 1.5 inches thick about how to be a father. And I took it to the thrift store, Salvation Army or whatever it was, and donated it because I don't think you can read a book, become a parent.
All those kids are wildly different. So the scarcity mindset, it's important to have the knowledge of scarcity mindset versus abundancy mindset. Now, I was listening to a show the other day, and Tony Robbins has this big long speech, and he basically says that, good times make weak people and hard times make strong people. Strong people make good times and weak people make bad times, right? So if you're in a world of abundance, and are we not making stronger people now because of this? I definitely feel like the entire globe, with the Great Resignation, everything that we're going through right now, this almost seems to be like a global mindset shift that's happening right now in our world.
You're not wrong, and I think Tony Robbins probably has a point. There's actually a book out there by the late Stephen Arnio, and if my memory serves correct, it's Tough Times Create Strong Men, and it's probably a 2.5 inch thick book. He passed away at the age of 33 back in May of 2020. He was a client of mine. He spoke from my stage, wrote 9 books, and cancer took him at 33. But I'll share this with you. When we start to understand what happens in the world around us, it's not about living in abundance, like as if we're living and it just comes at us. It's about creating it. The average person today, and listen, I speak so much, and of course, it's just over the last few months, the last 8 or 10 months, ramping up after COVID and all this stuff. But so many people have come to me over the course of time, or they've reached out through website or through social media, and they said, listen, I was born in the US. And I say, and? Well, the American dream. And there's an entitlement, a feeling of entitlement because I was born here. I should automatically have something. And if I can be blunt and direct, and sometimes I'm told I'm too blunt, you're not entitled to anything. The American dream is available to anyone. and in any country for that matter. I don't care what your background is, where you come from, who your parents are, what level of education you do or don't have. At the end of the day, if you are willing to do what it takes to go out there and make it happen, and that includes learning, that includes gaining the knowledge you need to achieve what you want instead of waiting for something to happen or for it to fall from heaven on your lap, you can do it. There's no, like, I don't get more than 24 hours in a day.
Yeah. I think the American dream is not entitlement. It is anybody, regardless of age, sex, gender, race, anything, they can come to America and work hard and be successful.
The American dream is not entitlement, but in feeling entitled to have the American dream land in your lap with no effort or work involved is entitlement.
Yes, and
there's a lot of that happening. I was talking to a young guy. His dad and I had worked together. His dad runs a very successful multi-million-dollar multinational company, head office out of Florida. And his dad phoned me. This is probably 3 or 4 months ago, and said, "Hey, listen, do you have a room in the roster to coach my son?" And so he shared a little bit about me, and I had a conversation with this guy, and he goes, "This kid, he's, I don't know, 25, 24. He says, I don't understand. My dad was a multimillionaire by 25, and I'm never going to be there." And the difference in, of course, having conversations, knowing his dad very well and having a conversation, numerous conversations with this young guy now, he's a good guy. He's phenomenal, comes from a good home, well-educated, well-spoken, etc. But he is of the opinion that, and his dad's been very clear, I'm not just going to give my company to you when that time comes, right? You have to make it on your own. Yeah, I'm going to help you with school and these types of things, but you have to go. So he thinks because he was born in the United States, because he has a good education, and because he comes from a good family, that it should just magically happen. And that's not real. But there is a lot of this, and I hear it. It comes to me. I want to share this. Figure out what you really and truly want. And I ask this question of every single audience I've ever been before. I say, what is it you really and truly want? The average person today starts to tell me what they don't want. I don't want to go broke. I don't want to go, bankrupt. I don't want a divorce, et cetera, et cetera. And I always stop and I say, time out. That isn't the question I asked. I asked you what you did want, not what you don't want. And most people, all of a sudden their expression changes. And they're like, I don't know, Shawn. So it comes back to what I said at the beginning of our conversation. If you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? And again, maybe it's a simple analogy as if you're traveling, but if you all of a sudden, God forbid, had amnesia and you were parked outside of my office right now and you were driving to the airport, if you didn't know where you were going, you'd end up driving in circles. And most people do that through life. And interestingly enough, they're focused on what's happening today. So I always, if you got in that car and you're looking at the hood, if you're in the UK, you're looking at the bonnet, but never further down the road in front of you, you'd crash in a city block. But yet you go through life and all you're focused on is the tip of your nose.
It's funny because when I think about myself in present tense, I'm definitely Ken. But when I think about my future tense, I'm Kenny. And I always say, oh, future Kenny's really going to appreciate that I did this for him today, right? And it's always, I'm trying to do something for my future self whenever I'm trying to set myself up in those positions and thinking about this is going to help me in the future. So I don't know if thinking about myself with 2 different names helps me do that or not. But it definitely, knowing that my future self is going to be happy with my today self for doing something definitely always gives me a good feeling.
You know what? I think we each individually need to do whatever it is we need to do. One of the things I learned early on is we are always going to have challenges. Challenges are going to be something that always shows itself. I don't care if it's in your business, in your career, in your relationships, wherever it is. And it's not whether or not we encounter those challenges, it's how, and we've heard this before, it's how you deal with them when they do arise. And we address it differently. You're going to do it differently than I would in anything. And one of the things we talk about extensively, and I don't want to cross the boundary here into anything that might be considered mental health, but is we have the ability to accept, reject, or ignore any thought or idea that comes into our conscious minds. And that is, I think, of utmost importance when we start talking about where do I really want to go? if it's in your business, yes, there's a transactional aspect of it, of an exchange of service or time or product for dollars. But going beyond that, how do you take it from the transactional and move it into the transformational? And it really starts, and we start to understand what we're taking in. As children, we were always taught that, garbage in, garbage out. But there's a reality to when we start to understand how the mind works, it's garbage in, garbage stays. It never leaves. It's automatically impressed upon the subconscious mind, and we keep that in there. Now, the subconscious mind is powerful beyond anything we can possibly fathom. And if you want an example of this, and think about this for a second, if you've ever woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning and went, oh my goodness, why didn't I think of this before? Your subconscious mind took something from 5, 10, 15 years ago and married it with something that you took in, yesterday. And so your subconscious mind is always working. You have the decision. What happens, though, for most people is they take everything in uncritically. And when we do that, then our subconscious mind starts working on everything that we give it to work on. Because again, everything we take into the conscious is automatically impressed upon the subconscious. So if we're giving it negativity, if we're giving it anger, anxiety, whatever it is, it starts working on and creating something from that. So that's where we manifest. We start talking about anxiety, or we start talking about depression. It's a manifestation of what we've taken in, right? And we haven't dealt with, right? So if we want to shift and change that, be conscious of what we bring in. I was speaking at an event a number of years ago, probably 10 years ago, and this gentleman came up to me and says, listen, and this is an eastern part of the country. And the gentleman said to me, he says, listen, I work in manufacturing, and every day at 4:30 when my shift and I get off work, we go and have a few drinks. And what's interesting is my results are identical to everyone I work with. They never change. Well, there's rather recent studies that show that what we observe, our mind is actually, our brain is actually creating neural pathways, and it's already working on how we can do what it is we're seeing. Right? So think about this. If every day at 4:30, you're sitting there putting back beers. Now, I'm not knocking someone if they want to have a beer. That's their thing. I'm talking about this as a habitual side. I'm talking about this as every day we're just sitting there and we're complaining bitterly about our employer, our boss, our mortgage payment, the government, taxes, the president, the prime minister, the whomever it is, right? But there's nothing, we're not doing anything to further ourselves. So one of the things I always say, Jim Rohn said you're the sum total of the top 5 people you hang out with the most or you associate with the most. Put yourself into a group, intentionally put yourself in the way of the people you want to hang out with. And people are like, well, that's pretty obnoxious. Well, no, it's not. Go to events, hear people speak about, mindset, about business, about career, about growth, about personal development. Why? Because it changes the dynamic of what you're focused on, what you're taking in, and what you're doing. Otherwise, it's more of the same, gives you more of the same.
Right. All right. I'm going to go back to the mindset and the subconscious for a second, or a minute, or who knows how long we'll be here. One of the most obvious ones that I see presented a lot in business owners, managers, employees across the board is the firefighter syndrome, or the underdog syndrome, where when you solve a problem, you feel really good. You get an endorphin dump, people pat you on the back. It feels really good when you solve a problem. So I see this happen to me for a very long time. I would wake up in the morning and I'd be looking for problems that I can solve. Like that was my jam, right? Oh, let's solve some problems today. And I know people that unless they're solving a problem, like something's broke, their performance is very lackluster. But if something's broken, they're the best person on the team by far. Is that something as management, I just kind of accept it. I'm like, okay, these are my firefighters, these are my policemen, these are my patrol people, right? And I just kind of put them in those categories. Is that the right thing to do? Or is that something that even as management, you should be working with your team to get them out of that mindset?
Well, listen, I want to be clear about something. From a leadership standpoint, we look at things a little differently because not everyone is cut out to be something that someone else is or not. So do you leverage someone's skills? And I think in the leadership realm, and leverage is a tough word for a lot of people. But at the end of the day, you're going to have people that are really, really good at one thing, and you will use your firefighter analogy for a second. If that's what they're good at, help them become better at what they're good at. And it's about doing it. It's not go do this. It's let's go do this, because it puts you into that. So help them together become better at what they do. It will improve you or the leadership role as well. Your policemen, these different roles as you categorize them, work with those individuals to become better at what they do. There's always room for improvement. And when you are, and I've had people come up to me and say, Shawn, I hate my job. My boss is, what, and I don't get this, and my coworkers are this, and everybody sucks. And to make a long story short, it's got nothing to do with them and anyone else. It's got to do with that single individual. And this conversation will happen again, and I'll step off a stage somewhere, across the country, and someone will say, do you have 5 minutes, Shawn? And I'll say, sure. And they'll go, listen, I work for ABC Corporation, and the vice president of this is that, or the president and CEO is the other thing. And they'll go through this litany of trials and tribulations that they're suffering, when in reality, none of them really exist except for up here. And when we shift and change, the late, great Wayne Dyer said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And when we shift our perspective on things, and this, I'm thinking of one lady in particular who came up to me at an event in Dallas, Texas, a number of years ago, and she retired president CEO of the company, and all she did, and she did it, she was promoted from director to the top role within about 5 years, all because of a perspective change. And she hated me for the first, 3 months or 4 months after she met me. She hated me because it wasn't what she wanted to hear. I wouldn't commiserate in misery. And so the reality of it is, when we change how we look at things, we get better. So when you help people see something from a different perspective, and you're in a leadership role, they improve. I wouldn't try and make them do something. You can, if I'm a salesperson, you can't put me into a role that doesn't benefit that personality type, that skill set. You can try and teach me something. So we call it in the corporate thing is cross training, so that I know what goes on. So I have an understanding of what happens on what side of the assembly line, and what happens on the other side of me on the assembly line, so to speak. Because human nature is, we want to know what happens before and what happens after, because then in our own minds, we can justify our little space. Okay. That's a human nature trait. So we give them enough information so that everybody knows what's going on and what the process is. That doesn't mean they're good at what happens 3 positions down or 3 positions or more the other way. What we do is we say, how do we work together to help this particular individual, who, whatever their role is, how do we help them become better? Because when you become the very best at what you do, regardless of position, I don't care if you're the janitor mopping the floors in the bathroom and cleaning toilets. When you're the very best, there's room for improvement. And you will get promoted, and you will get opportunities that come to you, right? Now, you may not like it. I remember being 19 or 20 years old and wishing that I had the hairline I have now, or at least it was gray, because I knew that I walked into a boardroom and had a conversation with the leadership team, they would take me seriously. When I was 22 or 23, they were like, yeah, you're a kid, go away. Right. And that shifts now, of course, I wish I was back to 23 some days, but, the reality of all this is, what's that?
All of the days I wish I was 23 again. Yes.
Knowing what I know today.
Yes. I'll even take the naivety back.
Yeah,
I'll take it all back.
But when we're in a leadership role, we find people to work inside of a certain silo and say, now, how do I work together with you to help you improve? I have a role within our company that is a revolving door about every 3 to 4 years. And that role will always be that. Now, does it bother me? Yes, but it's nothing I've done wrong, because I give everything I can to our team members. And when somebody, all of a sudden, they listen to me, they hear me, they're at events, they're editing our videos, and all of a sudden they go, hey, I can do some of the things Shawn says. I can start my own business. All of a sudden, there's a shift up here, and they go, hey, I'm going to give you 90 days, Shawn, and you have to find somebody. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, here we go. And it happens. It's when you get frustrated about it, and you're like, well, I'm going to try and hold someone down. Well, it doesn't work, because they're going to resent you.
Yeah. So I have a bunch of positions like that shouldn't be like I have an entry level technical support position at one of the companies, and it's designed to be a 3 to 5 year position. it tends to be 10 and 15 year position because of the way we end up being a weird family. But I tell the guys in that position all the time, like, this position and the pay does not have anything to do with your actual value. You are way more valuable than, $45,000 a year. But this position is only that. And if you like it and you like all the other benefits that come with this position, then you can stay here forever, but it's never going to pay, the business doesn't justify it to be paid more than that. And I can go back to a story when I was young and my predecessor, he's passed away now. His name was Steve. I went to him one point and I said, I can make more money than I'm making right now at McDonald's. And he's like, then you should go do it. And I think that statement is more important today than it's ever been for these kids that have Uber and Uber Eats and Instacart, that they can go do these other jobs. The importance of putting yourself in positions with executive managers and things like that, even though you're not making the money that you deserve, you're going to get benefits and knowledge from these people that you don't get at McDonald's. You're just never going to, or being by yourself, Ubering everywhere, right? I guess you could do self-help books when you're driving Uber, but
you don't build strong.
That entry-level position is so powerful. Go. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. You don't build those strong, powerful, and high trust relationships without having interactions. This idea, I remember this back in late 2020, early 2021, when the pandemic and all this nonsense was going on, and people said shaking hands, doing networking, seminars, events, boardroom, all this is gone. You might as well take all these towers in the downtown cores of cities all over the world, and you might as well turn them into low-income housing or into apartment buildings or into something, because we're never going back to work the way we did. Now, maybe it's changed at some level and some people working from home, and I get that, but it was a mistake. And I always maintain this. Listen, we're social beings. You need to be able to go out there, and I don't want to sound like a politician, but press the flesh. You need to shake hands and kiss babies. You need to build those relationships. Every business is a sales organization. If you aren't selling, you aren't in business. And I'll sometimes have people come to me, especially those that are in a tech sort of business. They're engineers. They're not client or customer facing, and they say, "Well, I'm not in sales." And I say, "Okay, well, time out. Do you have kids or a spouse or someone in your life?" And they're like, "Well, yeah." Okay, then you're in sales. They're like, "Well, no. Have you or your spouse ever talked about where you want to go for dinner one evening?" Well, of course. Well, that's where most divorces start. "Honey, where do you want to go for dinner?" "Well, I don't know. You tell me," and all of a sudden escalates. And we joke about this, and I tell this from the stage, and people laugh, haha, because they know what I'm talking about. It's real life experience. Okay. Everyone who has ever had kids, "Well, can I ask you a question, Dad? Or can I ask, I don't want to eat all my broccoli, but if I eat 2 pieces, can I be done?" And I've had this conversation. Okay. So there's always a negotiation. And if you start to understand that life, business, career, relationships all revolve around communicating, and communicating takes it to the next level, we start having these conversations, right? I've got a 5-year-old son, and I phoned my wife the other day, and she was doing something and couldn't take the phone. So he answered the phone when he saw my name. And I said, "Can I talk to Mom?" And he says, "Well, you're on speaker, Dad." And I said, "Awesome." And I said something to my wife, and he's like, "Dad, can you please repeat yourself? Mom didn't hear all of that." I'm like, you don't sound like you're 5. You sound like you're a receptionist in my office, right? We start to understand communication changes. And when kids are around, just like us, when they're around something, they start to understand, assimilate, and become part of it. And so if we want to become part of something that's anything but what I think it should be, we can hang out with those people who are going nowhere fast, or we can say, "Listen, I want to be the very best at what I am as an individual. I believe it was always intended we live a life of abundance." Okay. Now, I'm not saying we wait for it to fall in our lap or it's everywhere. It's about creating your own economy. It's about creating what works for you. I'm very privileged in my life because I get to travel. Well, now the pandemic thing is pretty much gone. 3 or 4 times a year, we take a trip. On Thursday, I'm leaving with my family to go hang out on the West Coast. Okay. Now, I've already done 2 or 3 trips this year, not because I'm better than anyone, but because that's how I've built it. And when you start to understand, you get to live the life that you want based on what you do. If you think that going, so in 2018, I'll share this. In 2018, they said kids coming out of college would have 7 distinct careers. by the time from the time they finish college to 65 years old.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
That was like
If
3
you
when I was
think back-
graduating high school.
I don't know how old you are, but I know when I was graduating high school and college, the general thought was you're gonna go get a job, stay there for 30 or maybe 40 years, hope and pray and cross your fingers that there was enough money left for you to retire on.
Right.
Right now, I certainly didn't fit that mold. I found out early in my life I was highly unemployable because I vowed I'd never be an entrepreneur. But look what I do, and I teach them now. But the reality of it is, we come back to the mindset thing, and you've come back to this a couple of times. There's a decision that has to be made. And it's been said many times, there are two things in life that your life is predicated on. And the number one is decisions you make. Everything in life is predicated on those decisions. So when you have a decision, it's, and I was talking to somebody the other day, and this individual said to me, he said, listen, Shawn, I really need to lose weight. I need to drop a lot of weight. My doctors are concerned, et cetera, et cetera. And we started talking about decisions. Okay. And he said to me, he said, Shawn, he said, when I drive home from work, I leave my office around 5 o'clock and I'm driving. He says, my car automatically turns into the drive-through McDonald's. And I said, that is not true. He said, no, you don't understand. It just happens automatically. He said, and then, later that night, I'll go home and I'll eat dinner. So I have McDonald's, I go home and have dinner. He said, then about 8 or 9 o'clock, I get hungry again. And he said, automatically, I'll get in my car and I'll drive to a Wendy's or to a whatever, and I'll turn into the drive-through. And I said, you do it to the car. He goes, well, the car does it by itself. I'm like, that's not real.
He's on autopilot. Okay? He's not living his life.
Well, 100%. So then we started looking at other aspects, and his whole life is that way, right? If we're not making conscious decisions about what we want in life, in business, in career, in our relationships, our marriage, our children, whatever it is, someone else is going to make those for you. Okay. So this individual now is well on his way because he always has a choice. He can go to McDonald's or he can go home and cook something that's healthy. Now, I'm certainly not a coach when it comes to health, but if everything in life starts here or is predicated on what comes from here as far as decisions go, it all stands to reason. If we make a decision that's going to be beneficial to you rather than not, why wouldn't you choose this one? Right. But if you think about this, the largest gap in our lives is always between what we know and what we do. And I don't know if you have kids or not, but I'll share this. When they're very small, okay, they do something they shouldn't. And as a parent, we look and we say, well, why did you do that? And he goes, I don't know. Okay. And then you say, well, did you know you should? And they go, yeah. Right. And we take this all the way into adulthood. Right. If you take somebody who smokes cigarettes, let's say, okay, and I'm not knocking people who may smoke cigarettes, but I want you to think about this. Anyone who smokes cigarettes knows that every cigarette they smoke is shortening their life. They know it's killing them, but they do it anyway.
It's the now satisfaction. They don't
Right.
care about tomorrow's satisfaction.
Did you know that a craving only lasts 30 seconds? Any human being on this planet can withstand 30 seconds if we decide to.
Right.
Right.
I can tell you,
whoever. Go ahead. Sorry.
hands down, and I don't hide this very much. I've always had alcohol issues my entire life, and the hardest thing I do every day is driving past the gas station and not stopping and getting whiskey or beer. It's the absolute hardest thing of my day, almost every single day of my life.
And do you drink at all?
I am to the point now to where the doctors have cleared me to have some drinks here and there. So yeah, I do partake today, but not nearly at the consumption level that I used to.
The coach in me comes out. May I share something? Or may I challenge you? Okay. So instead of doing something because the doctors say it's necessary for your longevity and your health, etc., I would encourage you to do this. Start small. Say, you know what? I'm not going to drink 1 drop of bottled poison for the next 30 days, 60 days, whatever it is. I'm not going to touch a drop. It's not beer. It's not a beer. It's not whiskey. It's not around, whatever. I don't care. I'm not going to touch anything for 30 days and do it because you decided to. And that applies to everything in life, right? It's this gentleman we were talking about with McDonald's and Wendy's, and he has this thing for eating garbage. And I'm not saying you can't have a Big Mac once in a while. That's not what I'm getting at. But when your lifestyle is such that, you're eating 4 or 5 or 6 times a day, you're eating, Big Macs and Whoppers or whatever you're eating, or you're drinking, I know a gentleman who I've known for 3.5 decades, And I have to tell you, Ken, I'm always concerned about him. He can probably put back, I don't know, 24 beer inside of a day. And he can put back, Canada, our bottle sizes are a little different, but a 60 pounder of good old Crown Royal in a weekend, that's a challenge. And when you reach a certain age, of course, it starts to have an impact, not a good one on you. Why do people do that when they know it's harming them? Well, the reason, very simply, is that instant gratification. It's now.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so
it's huge.
Those decisions we make determine what happens down the road. What you do today, and this is not directed at you, Ken, this is anyone watching and listening. The decision you make today is going to have a profound effect on what happens in your life, your business, or career tomorrow, next week, next month, this year, 5 years down the road, whatever it is. We don't know what that's going to be. So why don't we make decisions based upon the outcomes that we predetermine instead of letting the situation control it? I think it's chapter 3 in my first book. It's entitled it's entitled Create Your Own Economy. And people say, well, what do you mean? Well, when we become inner directed rather than outer directed, when we start to understand the decisions we make based on what the results are that we want, all of a sudden everything shifts for us. Now, create your economy doesn't necessarily have to revolve around money. It could be your health. It could be, habits like we're talking about, or it could be the business. And we say, well, inflation is going up, interest rates are going up. There's this person in the White House, or that guy's the prime minister, or this has happened. Individually, you can't control that, but you can control what you do and the decisions you make. So just because some of these things like inflation or whatever it is changing, doesn't mean that you have to live a life that is not abundant. Doesn't mean your business has to go out of business. Always remember this. And I remember my oldest son was probably 4 or 5 at the time, and him and I had gone out for dinner one night, and we were coming out of the restaurant, and we were in a little mall, and another restaurant, and a gentleman that used to work for me when I was back in university, he used to work for me. And so he waved and I waved, and all of a sudden we met in the parking lot next to the cars. And I said, how are you? And he used to own a renovation business that renovated bathrooms. And I said, how's business? He goes, oh, times are tough. I said, oh yeah, what happened? He goes, oh, my staff, the employees ran the company into the ground. Pardon? The staff didn't run the company in the ground. It had nothing to do with the staff. Okay. The staff were doing whatever the boss was doing, which was probably nothing. Okay. So understand something that the ball, this from a leadership position, the ball rolls downhill. What you do up here is going to determine what happens down here. And if you think about the same sort of scenario from a decision standpoint, the decisions you make today has an impact way down the line. And if you happen to have a family like I do, the decisions that I make today are going to impact my kids next month, next year, 5 years, whatever the case may be. So we have control always.
Right. Absolutely. It is so true. And, I like that you use the ball rolls downhill because the poo floats back up to the top. Right. Absolutely. Every time I tell my staff, I can't ever control what you guys are doing. Right. But you sure can control what I have to do, because you cannot show up at 3 a.m. and I'm going to get a phone call and I have to go. Right. It just is.
I was working with a company. I was working with a company not too dissimilar from what you operate. This is going back probably 3.5 years. We probably our agreement was probably up right before COVID or shortly thereafter. And one of the things that was so interesting is, and one of the things when I go into companies, and I started and ran a very successful multi-million-dollar consulting firm back in 2007. I sold it, and one of the things practices I made, and it came from that little book I ordered back when I was 13 years old, is I would have a conversation with all the key staff. And I would, instead of just the executive team and the president or the vice president or the whatever, the key staff, I would have a conversation with them, and I'd have 2 and 3 conversations. And you'd get the odd one that would say, we don't like the coffee that's in the lunchroom, or that stuff wasn't relevant. But all of a sudden what happened is there's a theme that starts to form throughout the company as you interview these key players. And it could be only 3 leaders or 4. Okay. But all of a sudden after 2 or 3 conversations, and the trust theirs to me starts to build, and you start to understand what the good things are and what areas in the organization need to improve, because those people, as much as you as a leader in your role, has a good relationship with them, they're never going to share with you what they'll share with me, because I'll never go to the boss and say, here's what so-and-so said. All of a sudden you take the theme away and say, okay, here's where some of the areas we need to put an emphasis and improve on. And that shifts things, right? So a lot of that when we go into organizations is a human component, not a process component. Yes, we create processes and systems and all these great things, but it comes down to people, because people will always be that wild card.
Well, and they'll open up to you, whereas they wouldn't open to a boss or maybe a coworker, right? They look at you as a
100%.
consultant, you're there to help them, and you are.
I
kind of like the silly little ones, like, I want different coffee because I can fix that fast for people, right?
We had one, I'll never forget this. We had one, and I had never had this happen. And I share this because in my mind, it was funny. It was a larger company. And there was probably about 70 people that I interviewed aside from the leadership team. And there's always top three, always. And the third one was the hold music on their, and of course, this goes back, now, of course, a lot of companies have gone without wireline phones and they're all on apps on their phone. We do. I mean, we don't have any wireline phones. But in those days, I mean, everyone had hold music, right? And so I was stunned. So I decided to call their main number one time after, seeing this come through from every single one of these key players. And I mean, the hold music was atrocious. And whoever had set up their phone system had tuned it into a radio station, satellite, XM or Sirius, right, that was anything but was heavy metal, I guess. And so the lyrics and all this kind of stuff was anything but what most people call,
what you would expect. Right.
And when you phone and someone says, "Can you hold for a moment?" and you start hearing profanity, you're like, "What is right?" And
well, they think it's the wrong company, probably. Like it only takes about 30 seconds on hold hearing metal. Like, am I even talking to the right company? If this is corporate America,
that's right.
Yeah, that's pretty fun.
So it was interesting, and I sat down with the president CEO and with one of the VPs. I said, "Well, the third thing on the list is hold music." I'm like, well, "It's music. It's elevator music." I'm like, "Why don't you call the main number?" So it's it's always interesting to work. It's a different dynamic always, but people always make the difference. You were going to say something. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I find it so amusing when I talk to business owners that don't ever call in to their sales line and don't ever look at their website. I was literally talking with the guy in New York this week, and I was going through his website with him, and it was so obvious that he hadn't even looked at it in years, right? He didn't know what was on his website at all. And I'm beside myself with that mentality. I don't understand how it even can play out, because those things are that's how you live. That's what feeds your family. That's what feeds your employees, is your sales.
Yeah, the average person though is busy for the sake of being busy in an organization, right? And one of the things we talk about is busy doesn't equal results, right? It's not about time in, it's about results out. So when somebody called, I remember working with they're kind of a mom and pop. They were, I don't know, relatively small, 25 million a year, say, and they'd grown it from the bedroom in the basement. And I remember the wife phoned me the day after they had, we decided to work together and they had signed off. And she said, "Shawn, I had an incredible day. I'm still here. It's like 6:30 at night." I said, "Oh yeah." And I was not at the office. She was calling my cell. And I said, "What'd you accomplish?" She goes, "We cleaned the bathrooms." I said, Whoa. You what? She said, "We cleaned it." "Well, the staff won't clean it to my standards." And I said, "Is there not something you could be doing that paid more than, I don't know, whatever, a few bucks an hour that someone's going to charge you to clean the bathrooms in your office?" And it was like I was speaking a different language, or I had smacked her or something. It just didn't, it wasn't there. And that company had been stagnant for about 3 or 4 years. They were doing 25 million and never, and what we realized, or I realized very quickly, it took me probably about 4 or 5 weeks, is that she was the one holding the company back, because there was this subconscious fear, that unconscious fear maybe, that she wouldn't be able to handle it, because she wasn't really an entrepreneur. She was trained as a dental hygienist or something. And, when she started seeing all these zeros, it just blew her mind. I remember walking into their boardroom about a week before payday, the first payday that I was working with them. And she had 17 spreadsheets printed out, taped together across the boardroom table. And I said, what's going on? She goes, oh, payday's coming up. I said, don't you have like a payroll company, Ceridian or one of these companies? She said, yeah. I said, what is this? She said, we have to give them the numbers. I said, but you have 3 staff here too. I said, that's a lot of manpower cost for a small company with, 45 staff or something. And she goes, oh no, they're on staff. They're already paid for. They don't cost us anything. And I was like, okay, now we have to have a conversation. People sometimes find themselves into an interesting role, interesting position, and it's if they're not open to shift and change. Now, this particular company, there was a decision made after I worked with them for 2 years that she was going to retire. And the company grew by, in a down economy, the company grew by 127% the following year.
I've heard that statement that they're sunk costs because they're a full-time employee anyway. It's not a good mindset to be in. It's
not real. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, they really cost you money, right? And if they could be doing something that was revenue generating, not
productive.
Right. It's just so bizarre to me, that mindset. But I've been in it, so I'm definitely falling victim to those traps throughout my career as well. And it is true, like the mindset shift of scarcity, or I think it's comfortable. I think people stop growing when they hit a point that's comfortable for them. Is my gut.
It's settling, my friend. And if you think
Yes.
about this, go back a few years again. I don't know what your age is, but Sears and Roebuck, when you go way back, on the door of the store, when you walked in, every one of those doors said satisfaction guaranteed or money back. Satisfaction is settling. Okay? We settle for something. Okay. So one of the things I always tell, don't settle. Do not settle. I'll share a funny story with you, and I think the folks listening will be interesting. A number of years ago, I was a young guy at this point in time, had a lot of hair, and it was probably a little longer than my father would have liked. And I had a friend of mine that worked at Sears, and the store that he worked at had this very long hallway, and the whole one side, it was probably 70 feet long. The whole one side of it was counter for customer service. And this is probably in the late 80s, maybe 1990, somewhere there. And this elderly gentleman walked in with this dolly and a fridge from the early 50s, 50, 51 maybe, belted onto this dolly and walked up to the customer. I don't even know how he got it in the store, but anyway, he did. And I was standing there talking to this individual that I knew, and one of the staff walked over to us, "Can I help you, sir?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "Here's my receipt." And he pulled out this handwritten receipt from the 50s. And he said, "I want to return this fridge. It's not working." She said, "Sir, you've had this thing for 30 years. And he said, "I understand that." But he says, "Do you see what it says on your door?" And it says at the bottom of the receipt, it says satisfaction guaranteed or money back. Now here's someone who wasn't going to settle. And I mean, he paid $25 for the fridge. Okay. And so the girl's like, "I can't give you your money back." He goes, "I want to speak to your manager." And so, this customer service manager came and said, like, "I can't help you. I'm not giving your money back." And so they ended up calling the store manager. And as a kid, I'm standing there watching this, I want to see what's going to happen. And the store manager comes, and, this is not someone who's typically on the floor or in customer service. He's dressed in the suit and tie. And he says, "Can I help you, sir?" And he says, "Sir," he says, "I understand you're the manager." "Yes." He said, "Here's my receipt. Here's my fridge. It no longer works. And I want my money back." And the manager looked at the receipt and said, "Sir, well, what are you going to do for," and this is, brilliance, why he was the GM and not someone at the customer service counter. And he said, "Well, sir, but even if I give you your money back, what are you going to do for a refrigerator?" He goes, "Well, I have to buy one." He goes, "Sir, why don't you come with me?" And the GM took the guy onto the floor, the appliance department, and sold him a new fridge and deducted $25. Right?
Yeah.
So,
which is absolutely the right thing to do.
Well, 100%, but the customer service staff were like, "Get out of here, go shoo," right? It's a different perspective. The guy went, "Okay, well, this guy's going to need a fridge. Let's live up to our promise," right? Now, in this case, he wasn't selling. I always tell the story because no one takes their fridge back after 30 years. But,
No.
it's an interesting perspective from a leadership. Those customer service reps that day learned a valuable lesson about how to solve a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And customer service on the front line doesn't have a lot of leeway on just about anything, especially at a store like Sears or Walmart. If nobody knows what Sears is, it's Walmart of today, I guess, right?
Yeah.
At least in the 80s, it was the Walmart. I remember in the 70s getting the Sears Roebuck catalog for Christmas was like going through that with grandma, man. That was the, that was the internet
You're
of the
dating
day.
yourself, sir.
Yes, I am. So it's okay. I'll accept it. It's been a long, interesting life. So I enjoyed it most of the minutes in it. So
That's awesome.
awesome. So Shawn, you've also got 2 books. Can you give us a drop on the 2 books that you have?
Yeah, so a number of years ago, I wrote a book called Change Your Mind, Change Your Results. Bob Proctor, who I think a lot of people probably know from the movie The Secret, and way before that as well, was my first coach and was kind enough when I asked him to write the foreword for that book. That one did become a bestseller way back when. I still sell probably 25 or 30,000 copies a year of that book. And then I recently came out with volume 1 of Daily Motivation. There's one page for every day of the year, all based around motivation. Special days, obviously, like Christmas or Thanksgiving or Valentine's Day or something like that. And then the other one I did was it's called the Freedom Planner. This is the second one. We did one that was called and it's back here, that we did the journal. This one's an actual system. Most people get up in the morning and put fires out without any kind of plan about becoming more productive. And if we actually started to understand what productivity is and how it benefits, we've heard buzzwords like productivity for generations. But productivity is defined as any action step or activity that moves in the direction of your goal or objective. Again, we have to know where we're going, and then this helps you break it down. And some things you're not going to get done today, but then you start to work on it when you're going to accomplish it, and there's a system in place. So that's something we've done, or I've done as well. And I think we're on our 3rd or 4th print of that thing, because we sold a ton of them already this year.
Wonderful, congratulations! And if somebody wanted to work with you, I know you have, very limited one-on-one space, but do you have another package that people can work with you, not one-on-one?
Yeah, it's less about packages. So everybody that we have the privilege to work with, and I know this from a time standpoint is interesting for some, and I get questions over this. I will actually speak personally with every single person that we work with on the coaching side. If it's one-on-one, obviously it's with me, but we do have a different type of, and it's not even a package, it's a program. Where I'm involved, it's hybrid, so there's access to me and our team. So the answer to that question is yes, without getting into specifics. And then this is my last year for one-on-ones. As of January 1st of 2023, I will no longer accept one-on-ones. I turned 50 in March of this year, and I made a decision right before my 50th birthday. I said this will be, and if we have an opening and I take somebody on this year, obviously I'm going to honor that. But as of January 1st, there will be no more new ones. And so, yeah, the one-on-one side, I love it. I thrive on it. But not doing the one-on-ones allows me to spend a little bit more time with my family, doing some of the things that I enjoy and love.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask you for advice. And normally I ask for advice if somebody's thinking about starting a company. But since you do a lot of coaching for and helping with existing businesses, if somebody's stuck at, say, the $5 or $10 million mark, and they just, they're stuck there and they can't seem to get past it, and you're talking with the CEO or the whoever's in charge of, maybe it's the shareholders, right? Is there a single piece of advice that you can give them that they need to be doing to help them break through that glass ceiling? Yeah,
and the reality of it is the average person today on their team is productive 4 out of 24 hours. The rest of the time, the productivity drops tremendously. So one of the things that I work with a lot of folks on, including organizations, and even, the $5 to $10 million ranges, can you become more productive? If you got 1 extra hour of high productivity out of your team, what would it do at the end of the fiscal year in the bottom line? And there are ways to do that. And if your team members become part of the strategy to move this forward, your company, then it will grow. But keep something in mind too. If you have been running this company, and in the book E-Myth by Michael E. Gerber, he talks about most entrepreneurs are not entrepreneurs. They're technicians suffering from an entrepreneurial seizure. And I think it's important to note that a lot of people quit their jobs, they're good consultant, plumber, whatever they are, and they're doing, but they're not actually running a business. Yeah, they have a corporation from whatever jurisdiction they live in, but that doesn't mean they're an entrepreneur. So an entrepreneur means, a few things, one of which is that you're not hands-on day to day with what it is that company does. And the other one, and I think that's important, is if it is an entity that can run at some level autonomously, could you walk away from this for 90 days and not have the company implode? Right. I think that's an important distinction between entrepreneurship and sort of that technician side of things. And it's really important, because what happens if you, as that entrepreneur, and you're the driving force, what happens if something, God forbid, something happens to you? I don't know, an automobile accident, an illness or something. What happens to your organization? So being able to create an organization or a company that can operate at some level autonomously. I'm not saying it doesn't need leadership. It does. But you want to ensure, small things like taking your face off the company. And I know people are like, well, it's my baby. I'm not taking that away from you. I'm saying if you walked away from it for the next 90 days, would it still operate, or would everyone stop doing business with the company because you weren't their point of contact? Right? So just small things like that. Productivity is the big one, though. You asked me earlier if people want more information, they can go to changeyourresults.com. They can send a message through. They can always call us. If you punch my name in, Shawn Shewchuk, online, anywhere, I'll come up all over the place. And then the other one is, if they're interested in the books, they can always go to our store, which is highproductivitystore.com.
Wonderful. Shawn, I've had a blast talking with you today. I've learned a lot. I think that the audience has gotten some great key points as well. Thank you so much for your time today. We definitely
thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
That's it for today's show, folks. If you'd like to join my text line community, the number is 314-370-2871. All you have to do to join that text line is send me any question about business or technology. I'll do all the research, and I'll give you an absolutely free, totally unbiased answer. Get to work.